she has actually 2 decades of international news practices, very, very rich experiences. At the same time, I think she feels very concerned about how the news media shape the society from indigenous, community to justice system at national level. And that's why she hold a very, very meaningful roundtable to gather the important people. So let's give Professor Water a big hand to welcome her to give the talk.
Thank you. Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank distinguished Professor Tricia Lin for inviting me here to NCCU. I've only been here for a very short time, but I've been made so welcome, and it's been so great to learn a little bit about this university, GCIT, staff and students. So it will be wonderful to share some of my own experiences and research with you today. Professor Tricia has told you a little bit about me, and it's true. I spent 20 years as a newspaper journalist in Australia, mainly working in Sydney, and with a business journalism specialisation, before I decided to go and train in education and become an academic and a researcher. So I've had 2 careers, and I'm very much enjoying the current career. I work for RMIT University in Melbourne. I'm not sure how many of you have been to Melbourne, but our university is right in the middle of the city. And one of the really nice things about our university, I think for someone like me and for other people who are interested in industry connections and the academy, is that the motto of our university, I won't give you the Latin, but the motto of our university translates as a skilled hand and a cultivated mind. And so this fits very well for people like me and for students who are interested in going out into industry with a cultivated mind. So that's really guiding all of our thinking at RMIT. We have a very big emphasis on connections with industry, and from what I've learned here, so does NCCU, so that is a great thing to have in common. My school, the School of Media and Communication, is a very large school, and we have a lot of different disciplines within our school, from advertising, public relations, journalism, media, to more specialised degrees in music industry, pop culture, cinema studies, and creative writing. So it's a big school, and what we all have in common is a very big interest in storytelling. So all of our students working across different disciplines are there to learn how to be good storytellers, whether that's for business or for more creative pursuits. I do need to point this way. It's because I'm left-handed. I was just talking to Tricia over lunch. I have a tendency, because I'm left-handed, to turn mouse and clicker upside down. So now it will work. Yeah, I just have to do it right-handed. That's the trick. So I will start to talk now about the group and the research network that I belong to that has created the report that I'm going to talk to you about today. So journalism is a very strong and important part of our school. Our school is not as old as your School of Journalism here. 90 years, I've just been told. Our journalism school is 50 years old. In the Australian context, that's old. So we have a very proud tradition of teaching journalism, and many of our graduates are leading journalists throughout Australia on television, online, in many different contexts and all over the world. Our journalism research has lagged behind a little bit, so we're playing catch up. We've been excellent at teaching journalism, and now we're becoming excellent at doing research. So our News, Technology and Society network has 4 areas of focus. The first is news, digital platforms and cultures. So we're very interested in the platforms and how this is shaping news distribution and consumption. The second is news audiences and news production. This has always been a strong focus in Australian journalism studies, but we're particularly interested now in topics like news avoidance and how audiences are changing with the rapid changes that are happening with technologies. Another strong focus for us is news literacies, information integrity and fact-checking. And we have been the only university in Australia to have a fact-checking unit in a partnership with our national broadcaster. And we continue to do a lot of work, practical work. So we have journalists working within our department, producing information for the public about misinformation. We have a newsletter called The Repost and a very strong website. And so this is an area also of research for us, an important area of research. And the final one is media governance, policy and guidelines. With the challenges that the Australian news media faces, governance, policy and government settings for news are more important than ever. So this is a big research agenda, and we're very lucky to have formed this new network. There are 5 of us who lead the network. We invite all of our PhD students in journalism to belong to our network, all of our more junior academics to belong to this network. And we also welcome other academics from across Melbourne. There are 9 universities in Melbourne, so there are quite a few other schools of communication. We welcome them along to activities we run, such as our reading group, when we're presenting seminars, and through our website, I'm hoping that we can connect with you here and that you can continue to follow and to communicate with us about our research. So this is the team. This is the team who have done the research that I'm presenting here today. You can see I'm there. We also have Associate Professor Diana Bossio. Diana is very well known in Australia. She's been, like Distinguished Professor Tricia, she has been a great community member of Media and Communication Association in Australia. And she chairs the board of our most important media and communication journal in Australia, which is Media International Australia. And she runs our very large degree in professional communication, which has majors in advertising, in public relations, and in digital communications. So she has a very big job, as well as her research agenda. Then we have Associate Professor James Meese. He is a leading scholar worldwide on news algorithms and news platforms, and particularly around these policy settings, which are one of our key areas of interest. And he is currently a research fellow. He has an Australian Research Council Future Fellowship. These are very special fellowships for leading researchers to help them to develop into the real leaders of the future. And then we have Dr. TJ Thompson and Dr. Edward Hercombe. Both of them are also research fellows, Australian Research Council fellows. They're the more junior ones. So they are what we call in Australia early career researchers. Eddie is becoming very well known for his research about news influencers, so he has a lot to contribute on that topic. And TJ is an expert in visual communication and also does a lot of work with me around mis and disinformation and fact-checking. So this is the team, and these are the researchers who designed, developed and held the roundtable and have analysed the results in partnership with our industry partners. I just want to pause for a minute to talk about the importance of listening. I think in communication we're often thinking about how important it is to get a message out there. You know, journalists particularly often like the sound of their own voice. But of course we know that good communication relies on good listening and on active listening. And by active listening, I mean making sure that we are fully understanding what the other person is saying, making sure that what we hear from somebody else we digest and we can put into action. And it's the same with research. There's often a disconnect between the industry and the academy. We're all interested in the same topics, we're all trying to achieve the same things, but often we're not listening to each other all that well, or we're not communicating with each other all that well. And so a really important part of our mission is to try to get a much better feedback loop happening between the industry and the academy. You've probably all had the experience where you're trying to nod along and listen to somebody, but in your mind you're thinking about how you want to reply, and you're not always then able to actually hear what's being said. And so an opportunity like a round table is a way for us as researchers to sit back and to really listen, and then to go away to think about what's been said, to go back to the participants to check that what we've heard is right, to ask them if we've missed anything or if there's anything that we've misunderstood, so that we can have a very clear agenda and really listen to each other. So in order to learn, listening is so important. That's a very, very important part of the message. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the methodology for this workshop. It was only a half-day workshop. The reason that we only met for half a day is because very senior people in the news industry are very busy. They don't have a lot of time. If we'd have asked them to come for a whole day, they probably would say no. We also made sure that we held our workshop on a Friday because it's the end of the week, people can relax. We invited very senior people from the Australian news industry to join us. Some of them were coming, I'm not sure how well you know Australia, but they were coming from Brisbane, which is in the north of Australia, thousands of kilometres away. People were coming from Sydney to the workshop, and people were coming from our national capital of Canberra, as well as from Melbourne. So by holding the workshop on a Friday, they could come to Melbourne and make it home to see their families by the weekend, or if they were wanting to, they could then have a nice weekend in Melbourne. Melbourne has a lot of great cultural activities to enjoy, including football. So this workshop was held in September. It's still the football season, so some of our participants were very keen to go along to a football game. And we had 14 participants in total. And they came, as it says on the slide there, they came from journalism associations, large commercial media groups, commercial television, and they came from the smaller media as well. So Australia is a very big country. It has a lot of smaller media outlets that cater for the local communities. We also have a very active community media sector, which is often run by volunteers. A lot of journalism students participate in community media. And then we have also some smaller commercial publishers as well. And then we have large public media like our Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and we have the Special Broadcasting Service, which is our multicultural and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander broadcast service. So we invited people from all of those sectors to be part of the workshop. And before they came, because it was only half a day, we gave them some questions that we wanted them to think about and respond to before we held the workshop. So they all thought about our prompts, about what some of the real challenges were, what they wanted to talk about on the day, so that we could really make the best use possible of the time that we had with them, which was only about 3.5 hours. It was also very important because people were talking about difficulties. We wanted to make sure that people in the room felt very comfortable, and so the workshop was held under what we call Chatham House rules. the Chatham House rule is that people are not to leave the room and speak about what they've heard inside the room. So people could relax and feel comfortable to openly share their worries, their fears, their plans, and not be worried that somebody would take that information afterwards and share it. A lot of the people that were sitting around that table were very senior, and in a way they are competitors in a quite a concentrated media environment. So it was novel for them to be sitting down together and to be sharing their thoughts. And I think that this was probably one of the most important and valuable parts of the workshop, was for them to connect and for them to be listening and learning from one another. We had a facilitator so that the 5 researchers could sit back and listen. We invited Jacinta Parsons, who is a very well-known and loved media figure in Melbourne. She hosted for many years a very popular morning talk show on the national broadcaster for Melbourne. All through the pandemic, through COVID-19, people would listen in, and Jacinta would really hold the community together with her radio program. She's very well known and loved, and I'm very proud to say she has also been my PhD student, and she's just successfully passed her PhD. So she's also interested, of course, in research and also does some teaching in our school. So she seemed like the perfect person, very well respected industry person with a strong research interest. So she was there to facilitate, and she did a very good job. She put everybody at ease. I'm going to show you very soon the topics that came up and how we organised the topics for the discussion. But basically, this mapping exercise that we did has identified 43 challenges across 4 areas: resourcing and personnel, the influence of technology, news audiences, of course, as well as the sector environment and impact. So here you can see a breakdown, and I'm going to be stepping you through each of these areas, so please don't feel like you have to take it all in. But as you'll see, there were a lot of mentions of these 47 things. And this really helped us to curate the conversation. So a lot of these things came up in the questions that we had asked our participants about before the workshop. And they're in this order for a reason, and that's because you can see there were more mentions of resourcing and personnel than there were even of influences of technology or the audience. So at the start of the workshop, we created this heat map because we wanted to check, you know how I was talking about the active listening. We made this heat map because we wanted the participants at the beginning of the workshop to understand where people's concerns lay. And we wanted to check that we had this right and that this could form the basis of the discussion that was to follow. And if you look along here, you can see that there's really 2 things that most people mentioned or talked about, and that was the resourcing. And there was a lot of discussion, which we'll come to, about time and about organisational culture. And there was a lot of concern about the business model. And for anyone that knows anything about journalism, we know that for the last 25 years, this has been a wicked problem for the news industry. So people are still very concerned about that. But yes, you can see here that the journalism associations and the public media, you know, in some instances have got concerns that aren't shared by the larger media. So that's very helpful to start with. And also for the people at the roundtable to understand what's happening beyond their own organisations in the Australian journalism landscape. So it was very helpful, and we did do some refinement of this after our discussion about it, but you can see that it's quite a wide range of concerns that people share and some concerns that aren't so widely shared.
Next question. Can you go back to that figure? So when you said 1, 2, 3, which means is the range or the topic from the top to the third?
Yes.
What they concern?
Yes. Yes.
And when you have the red dots, which means they concern about that extremely.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Has anyone else got a question about this? You'll be able to access the full report from our website, and these tables and explanations are all in the report. So, and we'll now move to look at the challenges, and after we've looked at the challenges, I want to talk to you about the research agendas that have emerged out of these discussions. And obviously, this already tells us about where the industry concerns are. But let's dive into a little bit more detail about each of the 4 very important areas now. So, resourcing and personnel. It was very interesting to us that while everybody was concerned about resourcing and personnel, the conversations from each of the different sectors were different. So, for example, with the community media, they run with volunteer labour, a lot of volunteers. And in Australia, as our population ages, the culture of volunteering isn't as strong as it used to be. And so they're worried that they won't have the same numbers of people coming in to volunteer, and they rely on that labour. So they discussed how important it was for universities to be sending students in to work in community radio, community television, to help them with their workforce. Whereas at some of the bigger organisations, the bigger commercial organisations, it was all about time. They kept saying to us, we don't have time. We want to be able to test out new tools. We want to be able to experiment with new formats, but we simply don't have the time. Or they would say to us around the table and to each other, it's the organisational culture that's a problem. We have some people in our newsrooms that don't want to adopt new ways of doing things. They don't like the new tools. We have a problem with trying to get people on board to be more curious and to do the work. So that was their main concern. And for some of the middling ones, so our regional media, the smaller newspapers especially, for them, their problem is how do they create a career path for young journalists? A lot of jobs have been lost in that sector in the last 5 years. So it's very hard for them to convince younger people to go out into the countryside to work on a smaller newspaper. So although jobs might have gone in the sector, in this part of the Australian news media, they have a lot of trouble actually attracting and retaining their staff, and also challenges with ongoing training because they're very small organisations, and the way that they're coping with their resourcing challenges and smaller staff is to centralise a lot of their backroom operations and introducing AI to do a lot of the basic work, and then a real human reporter can come in and finesse the copy, do the work. Some of the bigger organisations, when they were talking about resourcing and AI, also mentioned that they were using AI to do things like take the news broadcast story and turn it into the story for their website, because they said their people were so stretched for time, it was great to have an AI tool that could take that television news story and turn it into a story for the website very quickly and get that up and for the online audience. It's probably important to pause and say we've got these categories, but you can see from the way that I'm talking about them that there are many overlaps. So some of the resourcing and personnel issues, for example, are interacting with the technological issues. So it's not like these things are really cut and dried, but for the purposes of trying to tease out the issues, it's been important to think about these themes. Influence of technology, our next really important topic. And again, some real key differences across the different parts of the Australian media. So, the smaller ones aren't so concerned about AI. It was the big media, it was the big commercial television, the big newspapers who were talking about AI, AI, AI. We've got to get on board with AI. We have to think about bringing AI in, and we have to think about the external influence of AI on us. So they were all about AI. But it was interesting that the smaller media players were more concerned about other aspects of the technology. They were concerned about the way Google AI and all of these kind of changes, you know, when you go to look something up, people are no longer connecting with their masthead. People are getting an AI version of the news and not connecting with them. So a big challenge for them is, how do we remain relevant if people aren't being directed by the platform to our masthead? What do we do about that? That's a really big issue for them, because if nobody's going looking for their wonderful, authentic, individual news and people are happy with an AI summary, that's going to be a really big killer for them. Why would anybody take out a digital subscription to their local newspaper if they can simply get the AI version that's been skimmed? And then there's the question for them, AI is training its tools on our news. Where's the compensation for that? How do we have a business model that allows us to benefit from this change with these big platforms, big AI platforms, taking our content? And the other thing that they were worried about, and this has been discussed for a long time, it's an issue that hasn't gone away, it's about advertising, and it's about having to compete with the platforms for advertising. How on earth do they compete when an ad on Google is so cheap and can reach so many more people? And we'll talk a little bit more about advertising, because they have some very special concerns around the way the Australian government spends its money on advertising and where it's investing. So I think that's very interesting, that it's the big guys that are thinking AI, AI, and the smaller ones are still very concerned about the news algorithm. How are people getting their news? What impact is that having on our business model? How can we design a business model that can help to future-proof us in this very fast-changing world? So there's a kind of two-speed thing happening around the influence of technology. News audiences. I don't know whether you can remember from the heat map, but it was the big players, the big commercial players, and the public, and the Australian public media, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, our SBS, our Special Broadcasting Service. It was those kind of people around the table who were very, very keen to talk about what's happening with news audiences. And they were particularly worried about trust, issues of trust, and how they could ensure that they had the audience's trust. And the other thing that they were really worried about was news avoidance. The idea that people are just switching off. There was a lot of discussion about people switching off, a lot of discussion about the global context of news. It's a very difficult world that we're living in at the moment. People around the table were talking about issues like the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel, the Palestine situation. People were talking about climate change. People were talking about geopolitics in the Australian region. A lot of people, I don't know if they're disengaging from the news or it's the difficult and complex world that we're living in, but this is a real challenge for the bigger media. Another thing that was very interesting, I think, was that the public broadcasters were worried about trust in particular. And that was to do with our very multicultural community. So they were saying that they need to do more work to build bridges with all of our migrant communities, people from non-English speaking backgrounds, that there is a lack of trust, that their own research shows that there is a lack of trust. And the reason that those communities have a lack of trust is because it's perceived that those news services are too closely aligned with the government. So this isn't something affecting the commercial news or the smaller news, but the public news. Here's something very interesting. None of the smaller media, none of the community media, none of the local newspapers, none of those groups had concerns about the audience. They weren't worried about trust. They weren't worried about news avoidance. And so what they were telling people across the table from the big media is that that's their great strength, because they're so much closer to their communities and because they provide news about what's happening very close to people's lives, close to people's hearts, what's happening for people in their own area, in their own community. And so that for them is a strength and not so much of a challenge. And so it was very interesting from the people from the bigger media to hear that and to think about what it is that the smaller media people are doing to maintain that very close connection with their audience and to feel that they have that trust, and that rather than avoiding their local media, people are actually very worried about it disappearing because we've had a lot of closures of small local news. And often in its place, what happens in Australia, we call it news deserts, like places where there's no formal news organisation. And what will happen then is often people will start a Facebook page or some other social media page where people can go for local information. But a lot of the time these people aren't journalists, and it can be a place where the information can't really be relied upon. So the local formal commercial media and community media plays a very important role in keeping that trust and keeping people connected. And especially in Australia, you know, we have a lot of bushfires, we have a lot of floods, we have a lot of problems like that out in the countryside, and that's where our local media in these kinds of times, people rely on them so heavily. So they've got a very different role to play. The fourth category is the sector, environment and impact. And once again, we see differences here. So at the local level, they find themselves actually competing for the best journalism talent with the local government. So I'm not too sure how Taiwan works in terms of your levels of government, but in Australia we have 3 levels of government: the federal government, the state government, and then we have the local government for the towns and areas across the country. And they increasingly employ our graduates. As the Associate Dean of Communication, I'm very happy about that. I love to see my graduates going in and getting very good jobs in government, working in communication, whether that's federal government, local government, state government. So I have to say, I like those jobs, and I like to see our graduates taking their very well-earned qualifications out to do that work. But often they can pay more than the local paper can. So it comes back to the resourcing question. And so what they find, they get a good student that comes from RMIT in the centre of Melbourne. They go 300 kilometres out to a great country town. That young journalist really likes life in that country town, but they end up being offered a job by the local government to write their press releases, to produce their own version of the local news. So the newspaper finds itself competing with the local government publications and the local government very, very talented journalists and communication people. Tricia?
I just have a quick question. Because they are hired by the local government, are they considered working as more like a PR oriented, or is truly like a newsy, like independent from the what government wants?
Yes, no, they're much more working on the strategic communication, public relations end of things. But as we know, the boundaries between these areas are so porous, and so people are taking their good journalism skills to be able to make them multimedia packages for the local government websites. Often they have very highly produced magazines and newsletters. They have very active social media, and so people are taking their content creation skills and their news skills along with their public relations expertise. Yeah, so this is actually a problem for them. But at the other end of the scale, with the larger commercial media and the public broadcasters, they raised a very interesting question about this sector environment and impact, which is that they're so busy trying to create really high quality news content across a range of platforms that they lose sight of the importance of storytelling and the key skills that journalists bring: good storytelling, good writing, and being innovative in the way that we're tackling some of these big issues that we know audiences are avoiding. So the question is, how do we tell those stories to be able to engage the audience? We're so busy thinking about the technologies and how to get the audience attention on all these different platforms, and this environment is having an impact on the kinds of stories that we're telling. So again, quite a different emphasis to the other part of the news sector. So I think we're coming to the second part of the talk now, and I'm sure that you can see that just in this opening discussion about the four themes that we've talked about here, you can probably see already that this suggests that there are some very ripe areas for future research and collaboration to try to address some of these issues. And so this is very much our vision, is to listen to all of these issues that have been put on the table and to think about how, as researchers, we can partner with our industry friends to develop a very good agenda where we can tackle some of these issues together. So, just to sum it up, the key pain points are the shifting news audience, their behaviours and their attitudes towards news. So we know that everybody's very busy, people are flick on social media, have a quick look at a headline, it's just passing you by, might be very passive in the way that you receive your news. The question of effective resourcing, so in a constrained economic environment for the news industry, how do they use the resources that they've got to the best effect, to connect with their audience and to move with the times and to embrace the technologies and technological change, obviously, is having, as it has always on journalism since the beginning of the journalism, modern journalism that we know, it just seems to increase. So with the advent of AI, people, have had to deal with the digitalisation of news, the rise of the platforms, and now it's AI. So there's never a rest for the news industry. They have to just be responding and reacting to all of this change all of the time. So, what are some of the more specific ideas that came out of the workshop. So we're really looking here for some projects that we could do that would be very helpful. And so these were some of the more specific things that came out of the discussion. In terms of that question about the business models, and you'll remember that was the top thing on the heat map, on the mentions, it's the business model sustainability, that big question. And one of the things that our industry friends reminded us of is that in some other countries beyond Australia, they've been doing some very interesting research on the diversification of business models, and in the report, in the references for the report, we've included some of those studies, and I've given the reference for a very recent Norwegian study at the end of the slides. In some countries, they've been looking at the diversification of the business model. So the Norwegian study that's quite recent, they looked at, took a longitudinal approach, so I think 2006 to 2016, and they were looking at different ways that Norwegian local media were trying to diversify their business model. And so they were looking at the subscriptions, advertising and paywalls, and how various media in Norway have played around with that equation. What happens when you put up a really high paywall? You know, what's the impact on engagement and audience? If you drop the paywall, what's that going to do to your subscriptions? So, but we haven't had any studies like that to date in Australia. I don't know whether you have here in Taiwan, but our industry people said that would be really valuable. We would really like to know a little bit more about how other people or across the sector, how people are looking at ways to diversify their business model to make it more sustainable. So that's like, great, we can do that. That's something we can find out. And we can look to our colleagues internationally for some really good models for how we might conduct that research. So that's something we're now very keen to do, and to see whether these kind of approaches could work across the news in Australia. I don't know, maybe we can only find something for one of those groups that we've been talking about. Even so, that would be a big win. So that's something that we are hoping to do quite soon. I spoke a little bit before about the local media and their concern around competing for the advertising dollar. With the platforms, they've got other problems too. In Australia, we had a news media bargaining code, and what that bargaining code did was insist that the big players, the big platforms like Meta and Google, had to subsidise our local media because they were taking their news and not paying for it. But Meta has now pulled out of that agreement, and so that's really hurting our local media in Australia. The other thing is that government has been a key subsidy for these news outlets, and it's not an obvious subsidy. It's not like the government just says, here's some money, go and run your local radio station or your local newspaper or your local online site. The way that they've provided the subsidy is through advertising. So, and I don't know, again, here in Taiwan, I haven't had the opportunity to look. I've only been here for a really short time, but in Australia, ads for elections, ads for public health campaigns, ads for local council, you know, we're changing the day of your garbage collection. Ads for, you know, from an election to something very local have been placed into the local newspapers and onto the airwaves of the local and community broadcasters. And this has been a very important revenue stream in the past. But once again, They're creating their own channels, their own media channels. They're employing these good journalists and public relations people that I was talking about before to do that work. And they can see that the audience has shifted online, and so for their messaging, for their government messaging, in some places they're seeing more value for money by putting their ad on Google or on Facebook than they are placing it with the local media. And the other complication is that some states and territories in Australia, some local governments, are more committed to their local media, and they understand the importance of supporting them for the community and for the democracy. So the local media plays a very important role in our democracy, and so some councils say, okay, and some local government, some state government, we're going to keep putting the ads so that we can provide some financial support to them, and others are not. And so one of the benefits of bringing people from the east coast of Australia together from the workshop was because they had different stories to tell about how much money they're getting from the state government, the federal government and the local government. And they don't always know that. It was a benefit of the workshop that they could sit there and say, hey, we're getting so many $1,000s a year from our local government, and someone else at the table is saying, well, we're not seeing any of that. And so this becomes another important research question to help them to lobby governments, to give them some power in the policy space to find out what the pattern of this government investment is in local media for the advertising. So this is another project that we can do with them and that we can join together to help to support that government and media relationship that's so important to our democracy. I think one of the takeaways for us from the roundtable is that a lot of the time researchers in universities are doing research that's very relevant to the industry, but we're not always very good at letting the industry know about our findings. As academics, you know, we can be guilty of talking to one another and pursuing our own interests and not sharing what we're doing. So in Australia, we have had a lot of research in the last decade or so about our local media. It's been one of my own research interests. I've written a book and many papers on this subject, as have other people, and we've had quite a lot of government investment in research projects, but sometimes this research isn't cutting through. And it was also interesting for us to listen and to hear the local and regional news people saying, hey, we need to know more about your research that looks at community news needs, the business model, and how important this is for democracy. Once again, this helps them when our government, we've had a number of government inquiries into media sustainability in Australia. The industry needs our research so that when they sit down with the government, they can use that research to influence the way that the government's spending its money directly with them, but also in the kinds of research projects that they're supporting. So this is something that we really needed to sit back and listen to. I've talked a lot about the discussion around technological change. I think that this is a really important point that I've come to now. So the big media in particular, as I said, are concerned about how they become distracted from good storytelling by all of the other demands to be active on all of these different platforms and to be thinking about news formats rather than the way that we are conveying the story. And this links up, as I've said before, to news avoidance and to these kind of issues. But what came through really strongly in the discussion was how we could work in a more interdisciplinary way. So I mentioned before, our school at RMIT has creative writing, it has filmmaking, it has documentary making, it has all these different forms of storytelling. And what the industry was saying is, we need to think about how you guys can work together and come up with some really innovative and new ways of thinking about storytelling, and to be educating the journalists of the future to build their skills around great storytelling. So this was music to my ears, and I'll just pause here to say that I've been doing another piece of research this year with colleagues from our School of Education, as well as colleagues in my own school, where we also met with industry. We also had conversations, two conversations, one with industry and one with educators in New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam, and the US. And to my surprise, out of that discussion, and I do have that report too, which I can share with you, but to my surprise, yes, everybody, AI, 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 AI. But the thing that came out was the importance of a liberal arts degree, the importance of what they were all calling discernment. So in this new age of AI, it links up to this point. We need people who are clever storytellers, people who are strong writers, people who are interested in the world, people who are engaged with the big debates, with the big ideas, with the big issues, and who have a broad skill set for researching and communicating these issues to the public. So it's been really great to have two different discussions with industry, different people, completely different people, and with educators who also landed on this important point about the way that we are educating our students and the kinds of foundational skills and curiosity that will make a really big difference for the news industry. So I think that that's a really important thing. So if people are avoiding news, is it because it's not relatable, they don't feel it's relevant, it's not engaging them emotionally? You know, think about it. People want to feel something, and it's up to journalists to be able to explain to people why an issue that's happening halfway around the world relates to them, or why a really big issue like climate change is relevant to their local community and to their own life. So I think that's a really important and exciting area where we can work together, and it connects to some of the important research that's happening in journalism around the world, where people are thinking about the importance of emotion, you know, in a world where we have political polarisation and people are reacting from an emotional rather than a rational perspective. You know, this is only fueling misinformation, disinformation, all of these kind of things. I haven't spoken very much about mis and disinformation. This was an important question that came out of the roundtable. Media literacy, news literacy, information literacy, whatever you want to call it, this is another area of great concern to leaders in the Australian news industry. I think I mentioned at the start that Edward Hercombe, who's one of the authors of the report, his fellowship, his 3-year fellowship, is about news influences. It's a very hot topic, and he's getting a lot of citations for his recent paper in an important journal called Digital Journalism. So it's really great to have Eddie here, and the industry people at RMIT and the industry people who were there that day. They were very excited about Eddie and Eddie's project because they're very curious about the rise of news influencers. In Australia, journalism isn't an accredited profession. Interestingly, public relations is. So our public relations degree at RMIT is fully accredited with the accrediting body, but Australia has resisted codifying or accrediting journalism. And so there was some discussion in the room around the table, is it time for us to do that? Because we're having more and more people online as news influencers, and they're pushing out a lot of opinions, they're not bound by our code of ethics, and people are believing what they're saying, and so is it time that we create more of a distinction between professional journalists and news influencers so that the public can be more sure about what is the reliable, fair, professional journalism and what's somebody with a big following just talking about their views or their understanding of what's happening in the world today. They're two very different things. And so it was interesting because in Australia people have really resisted any move to accredit journalism. People say no, people have said no, we don't want to do that. We want to be a broad church. We want people who come from an array of different backgrounds. You can call yourself a journalist, that's okay. But maybe now it's not going to be okay. And so Eddie's research about news influencers is very important. And for that project, he is interviewing a lot of news influencers. He's talking to a lot of people in the mainstream industry and really trying to get a good picture of how the rise of news influencers is changing the news landscape. Of course, some of them are taking advertising as well. So that's a really interesting thing. And it's nice to know that some of the research that people were raising around the table is already happening. It's just on us to be able to communicate that better and to connect better with industry. As I said at the beginning, the big players, everybody was concerned about resourcing and personnel. So it becomes very clear that we need to use our position as a university. And I know that you're in a similar position here. You've got students working on great projects. You've got wonderful academics. We can play a role in helping to create the time and the space that the industry is asking for. They haven't got time to do it. They have really stretched resources. At RMIT, we have already set a very good example with our fact-checking service that we have made in the partnership with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Fact-checking, when we started in 2016, was a very new form of journalism. It's also a very resource-intensive form of journalism. You cannot write a fact-check in an hour or even a couple of hours. There is a lot of work to research and verify every piece of information. So this is a good example of how we can, as a university, partner with industry to trial, to innovate and to do a lot of interesting work that might not succeed, that might fail. In our environment, we can deal with a failure probably better than industry can. And so we've got a role to play in that. In terms of AI literacy, obviously universities have got a big role to play in that, and I know that you're already very much engaged with that here. I've already seen how you are working together to use AI, to work with these tools to create really innovative products, news, media, communication products. Teaching AI literacy is very important, and at RMIT we're not only doing it through our media and communication courses, we have the RMIT Information Integrity Hub, and this is where our fact-checking lives. And this is where we're building a lot of educational resources. In fact, just this week we've launched a big database, and again you'll find this on our website. It's searchable, so if you're an elementary school teacher, if you're a high school teacher, if you're a university lecturer, a university student, a member of the public, and you want to find out more about mis and disinformation, and you want to build your skills, this is a searchable database, and you can go in and find lesson plans. You can go in there and find quizzes and games that are a really fun and interactive way. You can find access to fact-checking projects throughout the world. So this is a really rich resource. So making industry aware that this is there and that they can use it for their training as well. So especially some of those local and smaller news organisations, it means it's an accessible resource and they can be helping their young journalists to skill up and build their own AI literacy, to understand how news algorithms work, to understand how important context is when we're thinking about AI literacy. And I think the other thing that was perhaps surprising for us was that around that roundtable of very senior news people in Australia, there was a lack of understanding about news algorithms. We could tell they really didn't know how it works. They just knew that it was affecting them. They knew that people were having their news directed by algorithms, but they really didn't understand it. And so it was also very good to be able to tell them about Associate Professor James Meese, who's one of the authors of the report, because this is his area of great expertise. And so he is in a very good position to work with industry to help them to really understand algorithmic performance and how they can maximise their algorithmic performance and how they can communicate better with their news audiences through building that understanding. So these are all very practical and hopeful things that we can work on together. Universities have a very important role to play. So I'm coming up to the conclusions now. So I'm hoping that some of these things are already very, very clear. Working together is the most important thing. If we're not talking to one another, if we're not listening to one another, then we're not helping each other. And it's very clear that the door can be hard to find. It can be hard for researchers to find the door into the news organisations because they're so busy. Often they think what we're doing isn't relevant. They're like, oh, what would they know? They're not practitioners. They don't understand what's happening here on the ground. So it can be hard for us to find the door. And it can be hard for them to find the door. It's very hard to find your way around the campus. It's very hard when you're in industry. They're not reading the academic journal articles. So how do they find us? How do they know? In a way, they're relying on journalists who come to us for an expert opinion about something. They look us up in the newspaper to try to find out who we are. So we need to keep the doors open and we need to have a really good feedback loop and to be feeding into that feedback loop all the time and for it to be running both ways. For us to be hearing them and for them to be hearing us. This is really important. Our timelines are different. Academic publishing can be painfully slow. I have an important paper that I've been waiting to appear. I think I've been to 3 international conferences and presented the work. It's been under review and in the pipeline, I think now for 18 months. It's so frustrating when things are changing so fast, and by the time the paper comes out, when it's about this, cutting edge of news, well, the paper might be irrelevant, especially to the industry people that really need to know how these things are working. So our timelines and their timelines, they're quick, we haven't got time, and we're stretching things out a lot. But that can be a benefit too, because we do have more time, as I've said, so we can do a time exchange. It can be very hard for them to think beyond the next thing. And having been a journalist myself and worked in a number of newsrooms, I know that there's not always time for the critical reflection that's so important if you want to be able to think big and make change. Scholars are in a very good position because we can tell people the truth. We can try, we can tell people, we can design a study, we can test our hypothesis, we can come up with a set of findings, and we can ask each other as academics to verify and to test that. I think that we're much better than the market research companies that news organisations often go to just write a very quick report. And if they're doing something and they want to know whether it's valid, you know, we can help them with that. We can also be validating what they're testing and what they're doing in the newsroom. I think we're in a very good position now to set a long-term agenda with our friends in industry. And I think that we can draw on their expertise and our expertise and the expertise of our colleagues to be really thinking about how we can solve the longer term problems. So, you know, not the problem of today necessarily, but the problem as it's moving forward. So it's an ambitious agenda, but I think that together we can do it. This is the cover of the report. It was only launched yesterday. And I've included some of what I think are the key references from the report, but you'll find the full reference list in the report, which is available on our website there. So please check it out. There's a couple of other reports there that you might find interesting as well. I'm very keen to hear about where there might be some connections and the same kinds of issues here in Taiwan, and more than happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you.